Thank you, Rachel, and thanks for that prayer. That was so grounding. The peace of Christ be with you this morning. Thank you. It's really sweet to be with you this morning as we wrap up this brief series we've been in looking at the end of Paul's letter to the church in Philippi, which Paul basically makes clear is his favorite church that he has started. Hopefully the other churches don't read this letter. They are a very poor church in an extremely Hellenized area of the world where there's a lot of worship of pagan gods, especially fertility gods. But this church, the Philippian church, has stayed true to what Paul has taught them about Messiah Jesus, and they've supported him as he has traveled throughout Europe and Asia Minor, getting these churches off the ground and sharing the good news of Jesus. That all eventually lands Paul in prison, in this prison, where the Philippians' support continues both financially and personally. They send someone from their congregation as an embodied representation of their being with him to this prison where Paul will probably remain until his decapitation at the hands of Emperor Nero just a few years later. A few weeks ago, our friend Abiodio walked us through the beginning of the chapter, where Paul implores the church in Philippi to lean into grace and to look out through Christ, to rejoice, and in doing so, to see the world through the lens of the work that Christ is doing in their lives and in the rest of the world. And then 2 weeks ago, Dave looked at the center section of the chapter where Paul claims that he has, quote, learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. And that contentment and gratitude, it doesn't come from our external circumstances, Paul is suggesting, but from the new internal posture that our hearts have gained as a result of experiencing grace. And here now, at the end of the passage, Paul helps the Philippians to see that an experience of grace, which brings gratitude, is embodied by generosity. Grace, gratitude, generosity. In 2009, I witnessed two very different versions of generosity. See, 2009 was 10 years after Scranton, Pennsylvania paper salesman Michael Scott had launched a program called Scott's Tots, where he promised a group of underprivileged third graders that he would pay their full college tuition as long as they graduated from high school. But 10 years later, Michael had not become the millionaire that he expected to become by selling paper, and he's unable to fulfill his promise. Of this horrible situation, Michael says, I've made some empty promises in my life, but hands down, this was the most generous. And to make up for it, Michael purchases a laptop battery for every single one of these kids for laptops they don't even have. This is the fictional storyline of one of the cringiest and most hated episodes of The Office, a show that specializes in cringe and was a formative part of my high school and college years. The episode does its best to get you to feel a little bit of sympathy for Michael, right? He's well-meaning, he's just a little bit misguided. We've all had moments like that, but the scale of Michael's misguided generosity and the fallout that comes from it, as you can see by his face when he is listening to them say thank you before he's dropped the bombshell, it feels almost impossible to laugh at, even in this fictional world of The Office. Also in 2009, I went on a trip with my church to Cape Town, South Africa, where we partnered with an organization doing HIV/AIDS education in public schools and in churches. And we were at a church called Massapumalele Baptist Church in a township there, with a room filled with beautiful, joyful, poor, hungry kids. And as one of the pastors taught, I was up on stage behind him at the drum set, and I watched these two little girls in the front row, no older than 4 or 5 years old, sitting in this pew together. And the older of the two had an orange in her hands, and as they listened to the pastor speak, she began to peel it and to open it up and get ready to eat. And that's when her friend tapped her on the shoulder and went like this and asked for some of it. And I watched as this girl looked at the orange in her hands. She finished peeling it, and gave the orange to her friend and ate the orange peel. As I've thought these last few weeks about generosity, about true generosity, I found that it's one of those things you sort of know it when you feel it. But where does it come from? And what would it look like to embody it? Or maybe put differently, I want us to explore this question together. Is there a difference between doing generous things and living generously? See, Jesus spent a lot of time talking about our resources, especially money, and our relationships to and with them. In fact, in Luke chapter 12, Jesus is asked a question by some bickering siblings about how to split up their family inheritance. And the first thing Jesus says is, "This is not my problem. You go deal with this yourself." And the second thing he says, he gives this brief parable about greed. He says this: there was a farm that had a certain rich man who produced, the farm of a rich man produced a terrific crop. He talked to himself, "What can I do? My barn isn't big enough for this harvest." And then he said, "Here's what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and I'll build bigger ones. Then I'll gather in all my grains and goods and I'll say to myself, 'Self, you've done well. You've got it made and can now retire. Take it easy. Have the time of your life.' Just then, God showed up and said, 'Fool, tonight you die. And your barn full of goods, who gets it?' That's what happens when you fill your barn with self and not with God." This is one of Jesus' more straightforward parables, and any bit of it that doesn't feel straightforward, I think is just because it's difficult for us to swallow. Jesus is essentially saying that a life built around and focused on storing up for oneself and one's tribe is a life of poverty in God's vision of the world. And underlying this situation in Jesus' mind is the fact that the harvest itself came to this man as a result of God's generosity. And yet the farmer responds with greed. Now, probably because Jesus was looking at a sea of faces who were squirming the way that we squirm a little bit when we read that passage, Jesus goes on to offer a vision for how humans should see and approach their resources. And it's 3 parts. It's look at the birds and the flowers, relax and receive, and give to the poor. I'm going to read this full section. It's a lot of verses, but it's worth reading in full just to sort of receive the impact of what Jesus has to say. So actually, I want to invite you, if you want to close your eyes during this reading, you're welcome to do that. And imagine Jesus offering this teaching to you. He said to his disciples, "Don't fuss about what's on the table at mealtimes, or if the clothes in your closet are in fashion. There's far more to your inner life than the food you put in your stomach. There's more to your outer appearance than the clothes you hang on your body. Look at the ravens, free and unfettered, not tied down to a job description, carefree in the care of God. And you count far more. Has anyone, by fussing before the mirror, gotten taller by so much as an inch? If fussing can't even do that, why fuss at all? Walk into the fields. Look at the wildflowers. They don't fuss with their appearance, but have you ever seen color and design quite like it? The 10 best dressed women and men in the country look shabby alongside them. So if God gives such attention to the wildflowers, most of them never even seen, don't you think he'll attend to you, take pride in you, do his best for you? What I'm trying to get you to do here is to relax. Not be so preoccupied with getting so that you can respond to God's giving. It's people who don't know God and the way he works fuss over these things, but you know both God and how he works, so steep yourself in God reality, in God initiative, in God provisions. You'll find all your everyday human concerns will be met. Don't be afraid of missing out. You're my dearest friends, and the Father wants to give you the very kingdom itself. So be generous. Give to the poor. Get yourselves a bank that can't go bankrupt. A bank in heaven, far from bank robbers, safe from embezzlers, a bank you can bank on. It's obvious, isn't it? The place where your treasure is the place you will most want to be and end up being. So here, Jesus gives a 3-part health checkup for you and I to determine how we're doing with how we view our resources and discern what kind of relationship we have with them. So part 1, look at the birds and the flowers. Do you notice them? Jesus is hinting at this sort of vision of the world where all one can see is what's missing. We call it scarcity mentality. It's focused on lack. But Jesus says, look around. God could have made one type of bird, and he's made thousands, and he cares for everyone. God could have made a type of flower, one single type of flower, but there are hundreds of thousands, and he dresses every single one, and most of them are never even seen by human eyes. He's pointing not just to this sort of general sense of abundance, but to God's abundance, God's generous love for his creation. And he's asking, do you notice? Or are you too preoccupied with what you do not have, as I was when I wrote this poem a little while back? This is from one of my journals a couple months ago. I am so aware of what I don't have. My life is threadbare, nothing achieved or grasped. I hunger and thirst for all that I lack, to for once come in first while my peers are held back. What is there to give? From what reservoir? Must be nice to live in the clouds where you are. If there's abundance somewhere far out there, make it more obvious. Help me see. Help me share. Maybe you resonate with that. Then in part 2, he moves on to say, if you notice God's abundant generosity, well, that should cause you to relax and to receive it. So when it comes to the resources you have and do not have, are you relaxed? Do you feel the insatiable need for more? Is your primary method of determining the value of your life in what you have? God wants to give you his kingdom, Jesus says. So why are you trying to build your own? And finally, part 3, and I think this one's pretty important for us who live in this area where there is a lot of resources going around. A lot of us can look at the resources we have and say, yes, I notice all the blessings and I am very relaxed because life has been kind to us. And so Jesus says, perfect, be generous, give to the poor. It's obvious, isn't it? The place where your treasure is the place you'll most want to be, and you'll end up being. In other words, if you notice and relax but are not generous, you still don't get it, and you are still basing your life and its value on what you have. You're not steeped in God reality, God initiative, or God provisions. Bible scholar Tim Mackey sums up this teaching this way. He says, the same overabundance that Jesus saw at a field of wildflowers is the same overabundance that the Creator wants to show toward me. And Jesus looks at this world and sees abundance. And he sees that abundance as flowing from someone who loves us and desires us to flourish. See, the vision of flourishing generosity from Jesus, this one, I think it's incredible, honestly. It's totally different from the visions that we see in our world and that are offered to us. I referenced it earlier, a now common discussion around generosity is this idea of mentality or of mindset, specifically that of scarcity versus abundance. And this originates from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I'm sure a lot of you have read it as highly effective people. In it, he discusses how one of the keys to effectiveness is the ability to create what he calls win-win paradigms, where you find a new way of seeing so that everyone wins. And crucial to this, he says, is developing an abundance mentality where you see that there is plenty out there for everybody. And this is in contrast to scarcity, which views the world in terms of what is missing. And this language, scarcity versus abundance, I'm sure it's been talked at you in your workplace or something like that. It's been used to help people see and become creative in the way that they deal with the issues that are in front of them. But the sort of generosity that Jesus was talking about in that teaching in Luke, and the kind of generosity that Paul is experiencing in this prison through the Philippian church, is less about mentality and more so about an entirely different reality. See, for Paul, generosity is a response to gratitude, and gratitude is a response to grace. That word grace, we use that word a lot, huh? We use that word so much that sometimes its meaning, it has so much meaning that it has no meaning sometimes. One way I like to think about grace is that grace is the bended knee of God. It's what theologians call accommodation. It's the movement of God toward us. It's God squatting down on one knee as you would with a child to explain his love for us. It's God bending a knee in marriage proposal, promising himself to us in forever love. It's Jesus, the creator child, before he learned to walk, crawling around and playing in his tiny family home. It's Christ the Son bending his knee to the Father in his life of obedience to lovingly show us how to be human. It's Jesus the teacher bending his knees to his friends to wash their feet. It's Jesus bending his knee in the dirt to write on the ground and free a woman accused of adultery. It's Jesus willingly bending his knee to corrupt tyrants and accusers, loving them even as they sentence him to death. Grace is the bended knee of God. And this grace, as Dave talked about a few weeks ago, it reorients our inward life to one of contentment and of gratitude. How could we not be grateful when we've seen such love as this? This grace is not a new mentality. It is an entirely different reality. To a scarcity mentality, the reality of grace is, the Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. It flips scarcity on its head because it understands that every presence and absence of blessing in our lives is from God and for a purpose. So even when God feels absent, there is abundance. And to an abundance mentality, the reality of grace is, I walk through valleys of shadows of death, but you're with me. It's not that everything is sunshine and rainbows, but that the valley of the shadow of death is real, and God sustains and has enough to carry us through it. A grace reality view of the world and approach to generosity finds its source not in resources, but in the one who resources. God is generous. And God is generous love, who makes himself known to us in the person of Jesus and gives himself wholly to us. This grace reality opens up a new way of receiving and a new way of giving, one that's untethered from the idea of return on investment. Return on investment, it does not fit into a kingdom vision of giving. It does not. Giving in the kingdom is about joyfully giving of self for the good of the other. God does not give win-win. God loses so that we win, and then eventually wins. It's precisely because our resources are limited that there is joy in generosity. And that is why it means so much to Paul that the Philippians are there with him, because their giving is not just them fulfilling a pledge. It's not just an investment. It is them giving of their very selves to him out of the gratitude that they have for God's generous love in their lives. Paul and the Philippians embody Christ and generosity to one another. If the Philippians had known that Paul was going to die in that prison, I am sure they would have sent the exact same gift. And that's because, as theologian Miroslav Volf says, giving is an additive practice, not a depleting one, for both the giver and the receiver. God cannot but love which then means when I look out at the very foundation of my life and the life of the world in which I inhabit, at the very heart of it is a gift. God has given out of God's abundance, and God requires nothing more than that we also participate with God in the gift-giving adventure that life truly is. A life of generosity is a life of self-giving love, and it is a full life. I want to just offer 2 quick notes on generosity. First one, generosity is always possible. Generosity is possible in any season, but it may look different depending on the season. Generosity does not always need to be flashy. In fact, I think true generosity often is not flashy. It doesn't need to be expensive. It involves noticing and responding. So you can be generous with your time, with your money, with your attention, with your home, with your emotions, your expertise. Notice the need and then respond how you can, you as an individual. And the second is that generosity is always best practiced in relationship. Generosity should be helpful, and helpful means knowing someone well enough to actually be able to see their lives and be helpful. I wonder how often it's hard for people to receive our generosity or to swallow it because we're out here giving away bread when they're in need of a drink of water. You need to know someone to know how to be generous. We all have had people in our lives who have tried to be generous to us, but it wasn't actually that helpful. So a question to you is, have you allowed yourself to be close enough to people in need so that you can know how and when to be generous to them? Last thing, this week, my wife Kristen is doing her final clinical work to be an occupational therapist, and she's at an elementary school down in the South Bay. And she told me this story this last week about how she and her supervisor were out observing kids on the playground, and all of a sudden they see all these kids kind of getting excited, and they run over to the fence, and that's when they noticed that a garbage man had pulled up. And he was picking up picking up the garbage thing and like putting it in the truck. And the kids were like cheering and they were so excited as he emptied this stuff. And so the garbage man sees the joy on their faces. And he gives like a couple of honks of the horn and the kids are like, yeah, this is the coolest thing ever. And then he begins to pull away. And as he does, he notices these 2 kids, one of whom is the one that Kristen is observing and has a lot of learning difficulties. They're running along the fence next to the truck as he's driving away. And he sees them and he's honking the horn and like taking enough time so that they can run next to him and have like this full experience and celebrate. Taking what you have and offering it for the good of another, even if all you have is garbage. That is generous living. Grace, gratitude, generosity. It is a full life. To close, I want to invite up Pat, who's our pastor of community engagement, to share with you a little bit about how we as a church are going to engage in grace, gratitude, and generosity from now until the end of the year. So, Pat, take it away, man.
Can we thank Josh for that? Yeah.